So today we continue with our experiments, and the first batch of experiments is going to actually deal with a limitation of the visual resources that you have, and we are just going to deal with paper. Okay, so that indicates to you that we're going to do two different approaches with paper, and also you can see that I've got some different paper related items. So I've got some tissues, I've got some soft tissues, and I've got different types of papers, tracing paper. Okay, so why would we do that? Well, simply what I'm trying to encourage you to start thinking in sections sometimes, and thinking how can you achieve something with a very limited expression. Okay, so first we're going to start with the paper collage. Okay, so it was fun to do a collage with the images. We had so much limitless possibilities. If we're talking only about the paper here, there's very little that we can do, right? Okay, we don't have any color. Okay, we don't have any pattern, but we can still play around and try to create a good composition just by using a surface. So we're trying to create textures. Okay, obviously you've got very different types of papers and they all are going to behave differently. You can either cut or rip, doesn't matter. Remember, all of those exercises, we are doing them pretty quickly. Okay, so I'm going to get myself some of the different material here. Okay, and I'm trying to build up the surface to create some sort of interesting thing. Okay. I'm ready, I've got a glue. For binding, I can use either glue or acrylic medium, matters not. That's not a broken one. Actually, I will keep it here as well. Ignore me. Okay, so I know that this collage is just done all with the paper, so that means I can just go ahead and start putting a glue on all of the surface, because if I'm building it up, inevitably, I will need to stick something on all of it. Okay, let's start maybe by... Okay. Things like that. Okay, so that already gives me one area that it's lifted up a bit. Okay. While I'm working on it, I can straight away assess, am I happy? Is the area, the lift, enough for me or not? I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, actually, not really. That paper is pretty thin. So I'm going to make it more visible by using a bit thicker paper. So I'm using a watercolor paper here. Okay, that gives me a bit more lift. Okay, you see it's getting very messy in here. For that reason, I've took quite a few newsprints, so I can keep my area nice and tidy. So I need more to do here, right? Okay, what about starting to building up things with tissues? So if I pick up a tissue, it's cool because it's got a bit of a texture, but it's very thin, so I will need to create layering to actually achieve any sort of lift on my paper. Okay. I can use things that are texture as well together. And while you're doing it, what you need to think about is, you need to think about trying to create some sort of interest in the composition. Okay? Limited tool, just the texture, and the raise of the paper. That's what I've got here to work. So this area now has a bit of interest, right? Mm-hmm. Here we've got boring stuff happening. Okay, so let's just move on to the other side. So how will I make it less boring? Okay. So this thin tissue, because it's so thin, it's going to never stick properly, like flat to the surface. So I can use that to my advantage, right? Okay, so I've got a bit more interest on the top here. Okay, I'm going to trim it properly later. Still, I think there's something missing on that side. How about if I will put a different approach? So all of those are pretty big elements. I can work with the size of my elements, correct? So, okay, I can use the scale to affect my composition. Okay, I think that balances this one pretty well, those little elements. I think here there is something problematic. It needs more texture. So immediately maybe I'm going to do something like that. So that corresponds now, it's just a smaller element. Okay, and maybe you're right, maybe I will add a bit of tissue and create a smaller element just underneath it. Tissue on tissue is not as visible, so maybe I still need something else on it. All right? Make sense so far? Okay, obviously this is now super wet. I need to put it away and somewhere to dry. Okay, so simultaneously, because we both are going to both first exercises are done with paper and tissue. So instead of just working with composition on the flat surface, let's try to think about sculpting with paper. Okay, so I'm getting my new vase. This time I'm going to use a bit of acrylic. Doesn't matter if I'm using medium or PVA glue, they both are going to stick pretty well. So, just because of a paper is flat, it doesn't limit us to working with it in a flat way. For the sculpting, softer paper elements work much better. So I'm going to get myself a bit of soft tissues, either those or those. And I am going to work with building up surface that rises from my base. Okay? Notice that I'm a bit more general here with the glue, simply because when I'm going to start working with it, with my tissue, okay, I will need much more glue for it to actually bind it to the paper. Okay? Okay, so generous underneath, moving it around while it's still wet. I can shift it, I can move my tissue and scrape it and lift it up and make the work risen in certain areas and flat in the other. You see from the distance here? Okay. Okay. Why do you think it would be important that I'm adding quite a lot of binder? It hardens when it dries, yes? So that will potentially give me a surface that later on I can paint on or stick things to it. If you don't add enough glue, then you're going to have still a dry tissue in between, and it might give you sort of like, it might start breaking or being affected by water when you start doing painting or gluing on the top of it. Okay, I'm going to develop only a part of it because obviously you don't want to spend a long time just watching me. I can play here with much more surface difference while building up with soft type of paper. Okay. The other thing I could do is, okay, I could approach it in a very different way. I could have my tissue wet, okay, sort of like a Mod Podge, not Mod Podge, paper mache style, okay. That gives me much more freedom to play with it and manipulate it with my hands. Okay. And it would give me very different effect. So for example, I could be much more precise in creating sort of a mountain, okay? When you're going to do this exercise, try both different types of paper, the soft tissue and a bit of harder tissue, so you will see that manipulation is very different, depending on which one you're using. Alrighty, okay, so you can see that potentially we're going to do something else with those. They don't look like the completed pieces, but I want to give you a taste of what else you can do with your surface while you're working with your mixed media. Questions? Okay, 20 minutes, get fun with paper.